Okay, so we're good and zoomed in, and we're going to get started here with the center dot. This is the only time I get a little bit stressed out, is trying to figure out how big I want the center dot to be and just getting it as centered as possible. So what I typically do, because we're doing a color gradient, and because in my head I want to do top dots as well to bring any of the really dark dots out and make them almost look 3D, I'm going to make the center dot and any large dots that I have the darkest color of gray. So in our spectrum here, we've got 5 colors. I'm taking the one that's the farthest to the left, and that is going to be our center dot. So I'm using a tool that is fairly large. It's going to cover most of this inner circle here, but this is going to be the largest dot probably, or at least close to the largest dot that we're going to use on the entire piece. So find the largest either drill bit, crochet hook, or dotting tool that you have, and I've got a decent amount of paint on it here. And then I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and see if I think it's lined up. The worst thing that's going to happen is it's not lined up the way that we want it to be, and we can always wipe it off and start over again. Getting the good base is really important because it is going to impact the rest of your design, but perfection is never, ever, ever necessary. So now I typically start by doing small dots and gradually getting bigger going out. So my personal preference, and this is going to differ between everybody, I want to go from the lightest color to the darkest color for a couple of rows, kind of on the way out from the center. So because I want to have some really nice contrast, I'm actually going to use white first, and I'm using my smallest tool. So this could be a sharpened pencil, could be a toothpick, could be a little bit larger than that, but the smallest tool that you have. So with each dot, you dip and then you dot, and then you dip and then you dot. So I hope this is an okay angle. Going to dot there. Now I'm spinning it around because I like to dot straight across. That helps me, even when there's guidelines, it helps me to make sure that I'm staying fairly straight. I find it easier to create a straight line across from me than it is if I was to try and dot here. So this is where the guidelines kind of can almost go out of play. I'm still focusing on the centering of it between those two dots, so it's a little off from the guideline. This is all going to depend on how your guidelines are and if they're a little bit off center. And if they are, that's totally okay. It's still going to be a guide to go by to help you with the rest of the project. So they're still useful even if you're not right on them. So I'm going to go again in between, at the equal point in between these two dots, and I'm barely touching the tool down. I am touching it down a little bit, but if you've got enough paint on, you don't even need to touch it down. You can just let the paint kind of come off. So my priority here again is to get that dot that I'm adding right now in between, as close to perfectly in the middle as I possibly can, even if it means that I'm not on the guidelines. This is where kind of forgiving yourself for not being perfect. So see how that dot was a little bit bigger? That's okay. It's not the end of the world. So now I'm going to go in dot again, and I'm actually going to add 2 dots in the middle here. Sometimes there's only 1, but if I add 1, I've got still quite a large space, and I'd like this to be a tight circle. So I'm actually going to add 2 dots here. This just comes with getting to know your tools and what size dots you're creating and recognizing the spacing there. Some of them might be a little bit tighter than others, and that's okay too. Again, it does not have to be perfect. I guarantee you that if you can kind of get that into your head that perfection doesn't matter and that it will not be noticeable when the finished product is ready to go. Because there's going to be so much other detail on here that you'd have to really get really granular in order to see it. this is kind of where it brings me to a good topic. There are so many people that think, I can't do this. I'm not quote unquote talented enough. I don't have enough patience. And I've told people a bunch of times, and I'll tell you guys too, that I certainly am not known for being a patient person in my everyday to-day life. Now, I do think I'm a much more patient person than I ever used to be. I think I'm a little bit better, and I'm able to take some breaths and kind of really think things through a little bit more. But I think this art form has helped me learn how to do that, to be honest with you, to see that it's not about perfection. It's about the aesthetic, right? And the thing is when it comes to patience, I completely and wholly believe that patience isn't something that we are. I don't believe that it's something that we are born with. I believe that it is a skill, just like learning a language, that we can practice and get better at, and it's not always going to be applicable to every single situation. So we have to be a little bit kind with ourselves. Now, I'm going to go to the next lightest color of gray, the really light gray. And when we put this on the canvas, you might notice that it's going to just barely look lighter than the white, or look darker than the white, I should say. Now, one thing that you'll get to know with your tools is, can you use the same size tool but just put some more paint on it to make the dots larger? So I'll show you what I mean here. So using the same tool I did for the white, I'm just putting a little bit more paint on it. And when I put this down, it is going to create a larger dot. So I can, in this instance, I can use the same size tool more than once. I still go with the crossing. So dotting across from me, and you almost just hold it down a little bit longer to let a little more of the paint come off of the tool. You want to make sure that you are wiping the tool down quite often to make sure that you're not building up too much extra paint on the tool. So every 2 or 3 dots, I'd recommend wiping it off. And see, this one didn't have quite as much paint on, but if I just hold it there for a minute, more paint is going to come off. And now I'm just literally putting those dots in the space, the little notch created by the row of dots before it. So that's how the spacing really comes in. Now, if I was to do every single one right after another, so go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around, we all naturally tend to lean one way or another. So it's really important to kind of see that the spacing is still going to be there and not solely rely on the little notches in the previous row. Because if the spacing was off there, it can be off a little bit here. So see with this one, for example, I'm going to actually put this a little bit more to the right and not quite so centered in that notch. And then we go in and we do the next ones. And now we can go in and fill in those spaces. So it's really all about practice. And I think that patience is something that we practice like any other skill, like learning another language, like learning a musical instrument. We just have to keep practicing. And dot mandalas are a really good example of that need for repetition, I guess you can say. The more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with holding your tools, the more comfortable you're going to get with how your paint works and recognizing differences in paint consistencies, you know, the thicker versus the thinner paints. And it just gets a little bit easier. You kind of start to be able to predict what the paint and what your tools are going to produce, and it helps you kind of come up with your designs too. So I don't usually plan out too much more of the mandala other than drawing on the guidelines, excuse me, and mixing my paint colors. Sometimes I'll look at other dot mandalas and kind of get an idea of what I would like to do, or techniques almost that I would like to try to add into my pieces, but I usually just kind of wing it. So there we go. We've got the first 2 rows done, the white and the lighter gray. And I'm going to go and do one size bigger again and do the next row. So I'm going just slightly up in size in the tool. Now, the thing is if you don't have something that's in that middle, you can do a larger dot and then just maybe skip every other notch. You can space it out however you want to. So you can go with a substantially larger dot. Like I could go in with this one and I could place large dots here and do just a couple divisions on it. And you don't have to stay in those notches either. You can space it out however you want to. So I'm going to the next darker gray. And we're going to add a third row here. You also want to keep in mind how watery your paint is to know whether it's going to run into each other and when these dots are going to run into each other. So you want to space them out enough that there's room for some paint to settle, but you also want to leave enough room so that hopefully they don't run into each other. And if they do, it's still not a big deal. You can either wipe them off and start over again, or you can just keep going. Sometimes I'll even go in with the tiny paintbrush and some black paint and make it look like there's two dots there if they've run together. That works too. So I'm always just dividing these spaces in half as best as I can. I'm not always successful. Like this one, I didn't count this out right, and that's okay. And we'll do this one. And then this one. And then go in and fill in the spaces. So when it comes to patience and ability, the biggest thing that I can always say is that make sure you're trying something that you really want to try for the pure enjoyment of it and nothing else. That's how the patience almost becomes not so much of a game changer. You don't need to have patience. You can give yourself permission to take time to learn patience with something that you really enjoy. It really is all about finding something for the enjoyment of it. And when you enjoy something, the practice comes easy. You enjoy the practice. Doesn't mean you don't have moments of frustration. That happens for sure. There are times where I have to get up and walk away, take a little bit of a break, and then come back. But that's usually because my mindset isn't in a space where I want or need to be able to do this. When my mind is distracted with a bunch of other things, or if I'm going through something stressful, you have to be able to say, am I going through something stressful and is this going to help me relax, or am I wound too tight already? And then trust what your body and your mind tell you. So you don't have to have any kind of ability. I've never thought of myself as an artist growing up. It's just not something that I've ever really thought about at all, honestly. And it's really interesting now to kind of see that when I look back over my life, I really have done some kind of art form for a big chunk of my life. I've always just kind of bounced around and not really picked anything. And I realize now that that's because there wasn't anything that really lit my soul on fire. So when this came up, I just fell in love with it and knew that I wanted to do it. So I'm going to put a larger dot now. So the idea is going larger. And now I'm going with the darkest gray again. Again, that is my personal preference because I want the largest dots to be the dark gray that I can then add top dots of the lighter and lighter grays and be able to, and be able to really see a nice gradient and really make those dots stand out. So now, this is where you want to be careful. So I know there's 1, 2, and then I want to put one here, because I know I put 2 in between my dots before. And then I skip 2, and then I put 1 here. Then I skip 2, and I put 1 here. And this is nice and centered in between these 2 dots as well. The nice part about craft acrylics is they do dry fairly quickly. So by the time we get to the outer edge of this design, there might be a little bit that we want to let dry before we do the top dots. And you might feel that you want to let things dry a lot sooner, right? One sure way to make sure your dots don't run together is to wait for the previous row to dry. Won't make a difference when you're doing the row you're in, but if you don't want them to run into the to the row before. So I kind of like to follow a lot of the same patterns as far as the colors to make it really pop. So I'm going to go back to the white again. What I have done in some previous projects though, is if I have 5 colors, just every row, I'm just constantly rotating between those 5 colors. You can do that. You can, you can make it whatever color pattern you want, really. It's all about what you think. And then at some point or another, you're going to get and say, I want these 2 particular colors next to each other. And you can make that decision on the fly. You don't have to have it all planned out. So I'm going to do some walking dots. This is going to be the first set of walking dots on this piece. So what I do first is I go through and I put where I want the peak of that kind of petal shape to be. The highest point, which is going to be your largest dot. And when we have such a small dot to go around, this is kind of our starting point. And again, I'm lining it up across. I used to do that a lot actually when I just started, is go here and then kind of almost draw a line straight across. And then I'm going to place this dot here. And I probably do it without even recognizing that I just kind of go like this, pull it across, and then here, pull it across again. Now I want these to be fairly tiny, but I don't necessarily want them to be smaller than this original white row of dots. That's just my personal preference. You could go super tiny with these dots on here. Super tiny dots look really, really nice on walking dots. But I personally want to kind of keep it about the same. So now that I've got those dots, now I'm going to place the dot here, and then I'm slowly going to walk them down. Now I count a lot when I'm doing this as well, because that helps me with my symmetry. It helps me get into a rhythm. So now that I know there's 5, I'm in my mind going to be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and knowing that I can then turn it and move on. So let's get back to the idea of, like I said, it breaks my heart when people say to me, I wish I could do that. I'm not as talented as you. I'm not patient enough. Having some courage to just try it anyway is an incredibly powerful thing to do. And it really stems to your motivation. Do you not want to try it because you don't think that it's going to be good enough? And number 1, whose measuring stick are you measuring yourself against? And number 2, asking yourself the question going, do I want to do it? Does it look like fun, whether it's good or not? If you get to the point where you say, I'm not going to enjoy it unless I'm really good at it, that's something deeper to sit with, because we're never really good at everything right from the beginning. Sometimes we're lucky and we have natural inclinations that we're good at things without even trying. And other things we have to work a little bit harder at. And that doesn't mean that we're not as good at them. We can sometimes be even better at the things that we try harder at. So it's really about thinking about your motivation of why you want to do it. My question to someone would always be, yeah, but do you want to? If you want to and say, yeah, I really want to, I think it looks fun, I think I would enjoy it, I would love to try it, then try it. This art form is not anywhere near as hard as I anticipated it being when I first saw all of the different artwork that these other artists were putting out. And I know that there's a lot of techniques that are very, very difficult, but the basics of it, I thought it was going to be a lot harder than it was. And I was pleasantly surprised when I found out that it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And I just started having so much fun with it. It was fun to try the different patterns and see how they turned out. It was fun to watch all the tutorials. It was fun to just play around with paint and get messy and see what happens. And then that all right there is all practice. And then you start to see your technique getting better and better. There are techniques that I haven't tried yet, and I'm sure that when I do, they're not going to turn out very good, because I need to be able to practice them. But if I can see the potential and I have some good instruction, then I know that with just enough practice, I'm going to be fine and I'm going to be able to do it. So the next row is the lightest gray again. So I am going to go back to, I'm actually going to use this tool again because this carried the paint down really well. So it lets me know that I could probably do another row with it. And because I did the lighter gray in this tool as well. So I'm going to just load a little more paint on it. And when I do the peak dot again, I'm just going to set it and let it pull a little bit more paint off for me, to make it a little bit bigger than the one below it. See how it's a little bit bigger than the white center peak dot? And that's all because I'm putting just a little bit more paint on the tool. I have not changed the tool that I'm using. If you don't have a Lazy Susan to spin it around, make sure you have something, a surface that you can spin your piece easily for you. It will make a huge difference to be able to spin it while you're working on it. And there we go. So those top ones, those peak dots are done. So I'm going to go in and do another row of the walking dots here. Four, five, six, 7 this time. So now I know that each side is going to be 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When I'm doing this in silence, I find that the rhythm is very meditative. I've started to kind of come to terms with the idea that, and that one I only did 6, and that's okay. Also not a big deal. You don't have to be perfectly symmetrical. 5, 6, 7. What I started to realize is that my enjoyment, I started to enjoy other parts of my life more. And having the kind of courage to just say, I'm just going to try it and I'm okay with whatever happens. I walked into this completely okay with wasting a little bit of money to try something new and totally understanding that it was going to take me time before I knew that I liked it or was good at it. And I just wanted to do it so badly. So when you follow your gut like that, because that's our body and our heart telling us what we really want, and we have to listen to it. And we're not really taught to listen to that. We're taught that it's frivolous or it's going to lead to a very difficult, financially unstable life. And what I've really come to learn, and this is me just being old and learning these lessons now, is that, money really isn't everything. Money, it provides a lot of security, but a lot of the things that I used to think that I wanted or convinced myself that I needed, I really don't. I really, really don't. And I was so unhappy where I was at before professionally. And again, not because I wasn't good at it. I was good at my job. I was very well respected in my field. But I just was unhappy. I just really didn't want to do it anymore. And I was making some of the best money that I've ever made in my life. And I was just so unhappy. And I just got to the point where I said, I don't want to be unhappy anymore. So this art form gives you the satisfaction of the symmetry. It gives you the satisfaction of doing something that looks difficult, that really isn't as difficult as you would probably think it is. And very quickly starts to kind of take shape in your design. Right? So you get some instant gratification with it, which is really nice too. So now my decision is, I've got this space here. Do I do another row? If I do another row of dots, they are going to intersect, and then I'm just going to have a single bit down in the middle. What my gut is telling me is that I think I would like to get started with the next row of the large dark dots, and then just add in maybe an accent dot in here in the middle as we get going. So that's what I'm going to do. I am going to go back to the darkest gray again, because I want all of my large dots to be the dark gray, so I can do some really cool top dots and make them really pop off of the canvas. So when you're looking for what size you want to do, you want to go with something slightly larger than this one. So we have two options for that, right? We have the option of using a larger tool, or we have the option of using the same tool, but just loading a bit more paint on it. And if you only got one row of these dots in the first row, that's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that at all. So when I'm spacing these ones out, because I now have to kind of line them up in this little divot between these two petals. So I'm looking at a couple of different things for spacing here. When I'm lining it up, I'm looking to see, is it about the same distance from the center? And is it about the same distance on either side from this previous petal? I want to leave a little bit of space so at least one of my rows in the next petal can come down in here, because I know I'm going to mirror this color pattern at least by starting with the white. I know that I'm going to get the white in here, which is going to be next to the lighter gray, so it's going to have some contrast there, which I really like. What I will probably do, instead of having my second row being this lighter gray, I might go to the third gray, just to again have that contrast, so I don't have two of the same color in the same butting up against each other. But again, that's all personal preference. You do as many colors as you want, and you do however the spacing is. It's not going to look bad if that's what you do. So that looks about the same. Dotting across from me again. Looks about the same distance from those two. Looks like it's in a nice straight line across this way. And now I'm going to move on to the next one. So when it's the first one, you kind of just line it up. I know about how far I want to be from each of the petals and about how far away from the center I want to be. And then I'm going to spin it, and I'm going to go straight across again. So it's about the same here. This is where, if your guidelines are not perfectly centered, they could throw you off if you start going based on where your guidelines are. So the guidelines are helpful for sure, but they shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of your spacing. Because what can happen there is if everything is off-center and you go with the guidelines, then the whole design can be a little off-center. And again, it's not a big deal if that's what happens, but it's just a little more gratifying when you see that it's all kind of lined up really well. So focus more on the spacing with your design than you do with the guidelines. If you find that the guidelines are way off and it's kind of screwing up how you're lining things up, or making you a little confused, or giving you any kind of anxiety because it's not lining up the same way, wait for this to dry and then go and erase your guidelines. You don't have to have them there. I like to leave them there no matter what, because it does challenge me to try and keep things as symmetrical as possible. But if it's not, I've done that before, where I will erase all of the guidelines. And once it's completely dry, and I mean really, really dry, like a couple hours dry, I can always take a piece of cardstock or something and put my compass back in the middle again and draw more lines on that match up with my design. That is always an option as well. But it's nice when it does actually line up nice. It feels really, really good. It's very satisfying. So when it comes to thinking about things like, I don't think I can do that, I don't think I'm talented enough, I don't think I have the patience enough, whatever it is that you think that you're lacking to do something, the important question that I ask myself is, if I don't do it, if I give up, or if I just don't even try, am I going to regret that? Am I going to be sitting there someday going, oh, I wish I just tried it. I wonder what would have happened if I did it. And you're the only one that knows that answer. And any answer is totally okay. But it's important to do that check with yourself so that you know exactly what your motivations are And asking yourself too, like if I'm saying, oh, I really want to be good at this because other people are making money and I want to make money too, it's not the kind of motivation that you can have for something like this. Your inspiration will dry up and it will become a chore. And once it becomes a chore, the creativity is going to suffer. So you want to always be checking in on your motivation, and you want to check in on what you believe your abilities are. Right? If I'm starting to talk negatively to myself, like, oh my gosh, you keep screwing this up. It's not as pretty as this person. It's not as pretty as that person. Then I have to have conversations with myself to say, okay, why am I screwing it up? Where is my mind right now? Am I in the right mindset to be doing this right now? Is it because I'm not enjoying it anymore? If the answer is yes, then that's a clear answer that this was not for me, right? If it's no, I enjoy it, I'm just frustrated and my mind is distracted with other things and I've got this stress and that stress on me, then I know it's time to take a break, right? Just like the motivation. Am I doing this because I want to sell stuff and make money, or am I doing it because I really, really enjoy it? The one thing that I can tell you is when it becomes apparent to your audience that you are doing this because of a pure love for it and a joy for it, and your heart and soul goes into every piece, it matters. 100% matters. I hope that makes sense. And you can do this with every piece of your life, right? You can do this with all of the different things that you may or may not want to try when it comes to finding what those things are that you really, really enjoy and want to do more of. These questions are kind of universal, not just related to art, and certainly not only limited to this art form. This might be kind of like a gateway for you, and then now you decide, oh, I really like this, but now I want to try pour painting because I'm watching other people do that, and maybe I want to do dot art and not just dot mandalas. Maybe I want to do pictures that are dot art, and maybe you come up with some cool idea that you just want to try out and see how it looks, and it could be something absolutely spectacular. Got to listen to that inspiration and that intuition so that you can decide and really check in with yourself to know where your heart and your head is at when you're doing this. I like to do this art and take a lot of deep breaths. That slows me down. I'm constantly telling myself to slow down and not go too fast. I'm constantly wiping the tool off. A lot of times I wipe it on my hand just because it's easier, or I didn't put my cloth in a place where it was convenient or anything like that. That's okay. Get messy. I thoroughly love walking away from a couple hours sitting in my studio and having all of these incredible colors all over my hands. It feels gratifying. It's when I'm like, I feel like a real artist, you know? We measure ourselves against other people, and we measure ourselves because there sometimes can feel like this thing called imposter syndrome, like, I'm not an artist. I'm a crafter and I got lucky. I didn't go to school for it, so I'm not as qualified to do this. Doesn't matter. I didn't go to school for this. And I know from one thing that this art form has taught me is some confidence. I know that the stuff that I make is beautiful. And it's never going to look exactly the same as someone else's because I am not exactly the same as someone else. I might hold things a little differently. We go at a different speed. We mix slightly different colors. We've got different tools. We follow different rhythms when we're dotting. It's all good. And give yourself that time to really just breathe while you're doing it. Now, when you're doing these other dots, you see that sometimes you can go and kind of connect them a little bit, or you can leave more of a space. That's completely personal preference. For me, it changes sometimes from dot to dot, how close I want to get them in there. And it's going to be completely okay no matter what. All right, so we've got the white row on. So now instead of going to the first gray, I'm actually going to go to the second gray. The reason I'm going to do that is because it's not going to the super dark gray, and I don't want the first gray to run into the first gray. I don't want two of the same color to be right next to each other because I want that distinction. So instead of using, so here's my palette. I had my white, then I had this gray that I used on this row. Instead of using this one, I'm going to skip over and use the next one over, the second lightest gray. I'm still going to use this same tool like I did in the previous rows because it worked really well for me. At some point, it's not going to work well because it's not going to hold enough paint to go all the way down. And that's okay too. I'm going to show you tricks on how to do that once we get to that point. Once the petals get big enough, that is going to come into play, but I'll show you a trick of how to deal with that. But for now, I know that I'm going to have enough paint, so I'm going to stick with the same size tool again. So I'm not going to lie to you, you know, there are other things that you can use. If it's something you want to continue doing, I do recommend investing in a set or two of different tools that you really like, that feel good in your hand, that create the results that you like. You almost, if you really like it and you really want to keep doing it, you have to kind of almost try some different tools because it will impact the end result if you're really watching it. It will make life a little bit easier. It can reduce some frustration because these tools are meant to do this. So now I'm going to go in and do the walking dots. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And don't be afraid to get out your test canvas. If you're nervous about how you're going to do it, you want to test how much paint you need to put on the tool, grab that test canvas and do a couple of rows with it, dipping your tool in, and see how much paint you need to have on it. So like that one, I didn't have as much paint and I almost ran out. So this time I'm going to add a bit more. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to keep going. So see how this gray is just different enough from this lighter gray that I'm still going to have a little bit of contrast. Mm-hmm. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I find the counting really satisfying. I do it all the time. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you have to skip over a little dot like that because they're a little too close together, that's okay too. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm touching the tool to the canvas. What it can potentially create is some kind of little dots in the middle, like little impressions, almost dimples. I don't really worry about that too much, especially with the little tiny dots. But the less you touch the tool to the canvas, the better, so that you don't risk having those little dimples. When you're trying it and you're just learning, don't worry about it. Get the movements down, get the patterns down, get to know your tools, get to know your paints. That is much, much more important than having some kind of imaginary perfect technique that just might not be comfortable yet. And that'll come with practice too. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 more petals to go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And one more. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, after you've watched this tutorial, if there are descriptions and to the steps or anything like that that I don't give, please shoot me a message and let me know what you would like to see in the next one so that I can be sure to include it in there for you. I'm kind of just going off what I found useful when I was learning, but goodness knows I'm probably going to end up forgetting something at some point. So if there's something that you wish that I talk about a little bit more and I don't, please let me know so that I can adjust that in the next tutorial. Okay, so I'm just going to raise this up for a minute here so you can see my whole palette again. So remember, I had 5 colors: the white, light gray number 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just finished using number 3. The 4 is what I did for these big dots. Oh, sorry, I just finished using this one. Now I've got this one open because I'm going to do the final row on these petals. I'm going to do one more row, and I'm going to do in gray number 3. So this was gray number 1. This was gray number 2. Now I'm going to use gray number 3. Remembering that the only reason I didn't use gray number 1 again is because when I was doing these petals and having these walking dots, I didn't want the same color walking dot next to each other. That is just my personal preference in this particular piece. I've done lots of pieces where all I've done is one color throughout the entire thing, and it still looks beautiful. So it's the size just as much as the color. So please don't stress yourself out if you're only using one color or you put 2 of the same color next to each other. It's totally okay. So I'm going to try and bring this back down again without screwing up anything on the camera. And all right, so now I'm using gray number 3. And I'm using a slightly larger tool again. So the same thing with the peaks of these petals. I want that first dot out here to be slightly larger than the one in the row before. So see how that's just a little bit bigger? So I'm going to do that here. And I'm not touching the tool at this particular point because I'm just letting enough paint flow out until it gets to the size that I want it to be. And then I'm removing the tool. When I do these ones too, I tend not to clean off the tool quite as much, only because I'm watching it so closely and I'm removing it. If I do put too much paint on, I'm removing it from the canvas pretty quickly. Hope that makes sense. So there's that. One more. Oh, nope, 2 more. There we go. And there we go. All right. So we're going to do a 3rd row of walking dots on these petals. So I'm using one of these nail dotting stylus tools that I have that have the silicone brushes on the end, just because I like this size and I use it quite a bit. This is, again, is only going to come with really getting to know your tools and doing your tests. So you could have a test canvas here and you could try out this one, then try out the second one and see, does it give you the result you want? And if it does, then come and do it on your piece. Don't be afraid to use that test canvas as often as you need or want to make sure you're going to get the effect that you want. As you get to know your tools and you get to know the paints and all of that, you'll need to use that less and less, but I still use it a lot. 5, 6. There we go. So this one is a 6 count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, this one's going to be a 7, and that's okay too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that happens quite often, honestly, for me as well. Well, I'll have one side that's a 7 and one side that's a 6, and that'll continue around the whole way. That's okay. It just means that where I lined up my center dot was a little bit further to one side than the other. So next time, if I find, for example, that this one is always shorter than this one, then next time I would place the dot a little bit further into the center. 3, 4, 5, 6. Squeeze a 7th in there. Sometimes it's even just about spacing. Did I leave a little more space on one? 4, 5, 6, 7, because that one I was able to do 7 as well. So sometimes it's just how close you're putting your dots together. Are you running out of paint at different times? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that may just be because my dots were a little bit bigger at the beginning. And again, that's totally okay. If you got to the point where there was 4 on one side and 7 on the other, then you have some symmetry issues and you're going to notice that. Still doesn't mean that it's going to look ugly or anything like that. It can still look very, very beautiful. And that one I just kind of spaced a little bit differently. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Squeeze a 7th in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I do this out loud quite often too, just like I'm doing here. It all depends on the mood I'm in. 5, 6. And there we go. What really helps once you get to a certain point is to kind of step back and take a look at it. Is it starting to give you the look that you want it to have? I'm really happy with how this looks so far, so I definitely want to keep going with this. I'm really, really happy. Now, I want to show you, on a lot of dot art, you're going to see that some people do partway through the design, they will actually, here I was just cleaning my hand off, they'll actually create a circle of dots all of the same size and then start to kind of build some more pattern around that. I'd like to do that, and I want to show you how to do it. This is where the guidelines are important. So if your guidelines, like taking a look at how far this top peak is away from your guideline, that can really help. If you are at a point right now where you do not have a nice circle around these guidelines, because we all drew different ones, they all ended up spacing differently, that's okay. Take a look at how far your top peak is. If it's just over the line, then maybe do another row on the petals. And that'll take it out further to get you to the next line. If you're really, really far from the line, it might be worth waiting and being able to put your compass back down and drawing another line closer. That's the benefit in the beginning of doing a lot of really close lines, so that if you don't use one, you're not too far from another. So if this dot here was already over this line for me, I would put in another row on the petals to get it out closer to this one. If this one was right on the line, I would probably wait for this to dry and then draw in another line not too far out, or consider again to do another row of petals. But this happened to work out really well. So I'm always kind of watching to see, am I kind of in a perfect lineup with one of these guidelines? And because if it looks really nice and symmetrical like this one does, and I'm not too close to it, then that could be a really good opportunity to do one of these rows of dots. So what I want to do now is I want to pick what color do I want to go up against this one. So what I would like to do is I would like to do another row. I would probably actually do 3 or 4 rows and go back to gray number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, 4. I know it's hard to see the colors there, but I'm going to go back to those ones. I'm not going to do white on this though, in this line. You can, and maybe I will partway through, but for now, I'm just going to start with the grays, and I'm going to start with the lightest gray. Now, the size dot that I'm kind of hoping to go for in this first line is going to be either row number 2 or row number 3. That's just a size that I really like, and I would like to keep it going out around the edge. So because I know that for row number 2, I used this tool, I'm going to do that again. Now, the option as well is to look at the other tools that you have. If you have a set of the DIY mandala stones, what I could also do is I could go up just one size to a number 2. This would probably be the same as using a number 1, sorry, the finest point there, but I might just go up a little bit higher. So you can kind of pick and choose based on your tools, and again, try out your tools on your test canvas and see what's going to work for you.